But the new management was also looking forward to the company's next gamble. The idea came from the new managing director brought in by Michelin, a man named Pierre-Jules Boulanger. He wanted to motorize the whole country, especially the untapped rural market, potential customers who still relied on horse-drawn carts and carriages. Boulanger ordered Citroën engineers to design what he called an umbrella on four wheels.
It was a small car, very austere in appearance, very low-powered, geared well enough so that it could run well enough on the roads, and with room for two people and a load of potatoes, which is sort of an unusual demographic characteristic to look for.
The top-secret project received the code name TPV, or Très Petite Voiture, very small car. As with the traction, André Lefebvre headed the project after it had been refused by the chief designer Maurice Broglie. The 1937 prototype TPV had a front end that was corrugated to improve the strength of the light gauge aluminium, and only one headlamp, the legal minimum. The two-cylinder engine could barely get the car up to 40 miles an hour, but it was extremely economical, more than 60 miles to the gallon. There were no frills. Even the windscreen wiper was manually operated. Boulanger also wanted the front-drive TPV to handle comfortably on rough country back roads, and included the specification that a basket of eggs set on the back seat should survive having the car driven across a plowed field with all the eggs unbroken. This the engineers accomplished by including a four-wheel independent suspension, along with rack and pinion steering and power-assisted brakes. The car was finally ready for production in 1939, and 250 demonstration copies rolled off the line on September the 3rd. The next day, Hitler invaded Poland, and France was at war. World War II and the German occupation of France in 1940 gradually ground Citroën production to a halt. Company managers refused to collaborate with the Nazi conquerors, and by 1943, Citroën factories had been shut down completely. To prevent the TPV from falling into German hands, Pierre Boulanger ordered all but one of the prototypes destroyed. It wasn't until Germany was defeated and the war was over that Citroën restarted production and work began again in earnest on the TPV. Finally, in 1948, after 12 years of design and development, Citroën's very small car was ready to be introduced at the Paris Motor Show under its now official name, the Deux Chevaux, or 2CV.
À Paris, le 35e Salon de l'Automobile a été inauguré par Monsieur Vincent Auriol.
The 2CV as introduced was still true to the original design concept with just a few modifications. The corrugated aluminium had been replaced with easier-to-weld sheet steel. The original water-cooled two-cylinder engine had been replaced with an air-cooled design, which was easier to start in winter, and cheaper too, if a bit noisy. The 2CV was stunningly inexpensive, at a contemporary price equivalent to £212, about a third the cost of a typical American car. Critical reaction was somewhat mixed. One American journalist asked if it came with a can opener. But the people of France immediately took to the odd little car, and thousands of orders were placed for the 2CV right there at the motor show. By 1950, the back order time ran to 6 years.
It was a tremendous success, and it did put the French farmer on wheels, and it did it economically, and it was a fine little car. And if you really think about it, it's really all anybody needs. I mean, we really don't need the Luxomobiles that we have. But for its time, it was exactly what everybody wanted.
Over the years, the 2CV became a part of the fabric of French life. The car became popular with the younger generation, and Citroën promoted it by staging races, round-the-world tours, rallies such as the Africa Raid. James Bond even drove one in For Your Eyes Only. In later years, Citroën would try to replace the 2CV with cars built on the same mechanics but with greater upmarket appeal. The Ami 6 would have swift, exaggerated lines, emphasized by the inclined rear window. The Diane would fit into the product line between the 2CV and the Ami, and would last in production for 23 years. Citroën would also offer the Jeep-like Mehari, an all-terrain four-seat pickup with a ding-resistant plastic body. Each of these vehicles would have its day and its place in the market. But the little 2CV outlived them all. It would even experience a modest revival during the 1970s.
I did get the 2CV at the time at which there was the gas crisis, when there was long lines of people trying to obtain gasoline, and the 2CV was very good about this. It was easy to take it from place to place with very little fuel.
The 2CV lasted in production for more than 41 years. When the last rolled off the line in 1990, more than 3.8 million had been sold worldwide. A return on the company's wager greater than anyone could have imagined. Greater even than the tremendous success of the traction Avant, which in 1954 was nearing the end of its life and preparing to be replaced by Citroën's most daring breakthrough yet. Two important things happened to the Traction 15.6 in the year 1954. For the first time, it was offered in a color other than black, and its name changed to 15.6H for hydropneumatic. The old car now had a new air and oil pressurized rear suspension system. But the changes were not intended to extend the Traction line. In fact, the last Traction Avant rolled off the Quai de Javel production line just 3 years later, after 23 years of manufacture and 760,000 sales. Rather, Citroën had given the 15.6 a hydropneumatic suspension as part of its larger plan to introduce the Traction's replacement, which would have hydropneumatic suspension on all four wheels. By the time the last Traction left the factory, that successor had been exciting controversy on the French automotive scene for 2 years. The DS19, once again masterminded by André Lefebvre, was radically different from every other car on the road in the mid-1950s, both in terms of the styling and the technology that it offered. For example, American cars of the day were giant rounded boxes with gaudy chrome like this 55 Buick. The futuristic DS, on the other hand, was shaped for minimum aerodynamic drag, with the radiator below the midline of the gracefully curved bonnet. Inside, the dashboard was dominated by a unique single-spoke steering wheel.
The aesthetics of the DS model, and my first Citroën was a DS, was quite controversial, polarizing almost. That is, there were people who thought it was probably the ugliest car they'd ever seen. There were other people who thought it was a beautiful, streamlined object. And partly it's a matter of getting used to, and I think that what we've seen in the years since it was introduced is that more and more cars have come to look like the DS than otherwise.
The DS19 was Citroën's rocket to the space age, fired 2 years before the launch of the Sputnik. In fact, the aesthetics of the car were so compelling and unusual that the DS shell was exhibited in museums. For those less excited about the looks of the DS, there were other attractions.
I have to admit that the DS, when it first came out, I thought it was hideous. But after driving it, I thought it was absolutely fantastic. I was flabbergasted by what the car could do. And I forgot the looks.
What impressed engineers like Bill and John was the advanced performance the DS offered. The heart of the car's new technology was quite literally a pump, which powered the suspension, steering, semi-automatic transmission, and the first disc brakes ever fitted on a French production automobile. The self-leveling hydropneumatic suspension let the wheels track the road like the needle in a record groove. This gave the car impressive road handling and made the ride uniquely smooth and comfortable, both on the highway and on rough country roads. It even gave the DS a variable clearance, which the driver could change at the flip of a lever. The system worked by connecting each wheel to a piston. Each of the 4 pistons pressed on the liquid in a suspension sphere, which then compressed and decompressed a gas in the sphere. The pressure was shifted from sphere to sphere by a system of valves in order to keep the car level at all times.
The hydraulic pumps generates pressure, which is accumulated in this steel sphere and then distributed to the front suspension, which one element for this wheel is here, and this element for the opposite wheel is here, and we have 2 identical spheres for the rear axle as well.
The self-leveling ability even made it possible for the DS to operate with 1 wheel missing.
At Kyalami, S.A. Mirror takes a look at a ballet on 3 wheels, the wheel and turn of a Citroën cavalcade that spells out safety.
When traveling on all 4 wheels, the 1.9-litre engine adapted from the traction Avant produced 70 brake horsepower and speeds of up to 85 miles an hour. Whatever anxiety Citroën managers might have felt about introducing yet another revolutionary and controversial car was immediately relieved. The DS19 was an instant success. 750 of the sleek new cars were ordered in the first 45 minutes of its debut at the 1955 Paris Motor Show. 12,000 by the end of the first day. As the years went by, the DS gradually came to be identified with France in almost the same way as Camembert cheese and the Eiffel Tower. In the DS, pleasing form and aerodynamic function followed each other like yin and yang. For the first time, car design and a marketing campaign had been created together to attribute an image to the vehicle from the day the project was born. It became the car of French presidents like René Coty, who toured the countryside in DS19 motorcades.
Précède l'imposant cortège du président de la République en visite officielle en Alsace.
In fact, a DS saved the life of President Charles de Gaulle during the 1962 assassination attempt by the ultranationalist Black Hand group. The assassins shot out 2 of the tires, but as this promotional film demonstrates, the DS was able to stop in complete control on only 2 wheels. And the hydropneumatic suspension even made it possible to change the blown tires quickly without resorting to a jack. Still, for all the advanced technology, for all the glamour and cachet the DS acquired, it was still a highly unusual and idiosyncratic car. By ignoring the fashions of the day and designing the best car they knew how to build, Citroën's engineers had created an automobile that symbolized Gallic independence.
I think it's fair to say that French car manufacturers have some of the characteristics of a French maitre d' in a very expensive restaurant. You are the customer, but they're not there necessarily to be pleased. You should be pleased just because you're there. That's sort of a Gallic indifference to the customer requirement. But there's a reverse psychology to it. If they thought the cars were that good, it seemed to make the customers think the cars were that good.
But of course, this perpetual drive towards advancing the state of the art meant that Citroën would soon have to improve on the DS19. The question was, how do you top your best?